Bonjour, bonsoir, good morning everyone. Thank you for attending this event. My name is Bénédicte Collin and I'm the president of the French Chamber of Commerce and Industry. It is really my honor and privilege today to interview Luc Rémont, Executive Vice President, International Operations of Schneider Electric and a member of the Executive Committee. Luc, prior to joining Schneider, Luc was a director of the Corporate and Investment Bank of America, Merrill Lynch in France from 2009. He also held several positions in the French Ministry of Economy and Finance. And Luc brings a wealth of experience in infrastructure, operation and financing, both from a private and public sector perspective. Luc, welcome. We are very happy to have you around and to give you generously some time to us. Before we start the interview, I also wanted to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I sit today and pay my respect to their elders, past and present. I also extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander of people here. I also would like to thank the French Embassy, Austrade, and our naming sponsors, Schneider Electric, thank you, Luc, and all the other sponsors and partners for making this event possible. Thank you, Luc, us today, and perhaps less traveling than usual in your normal schedule. So let me first fire and kick off with a question, and really asking you that, in your role, you've got exposure to numerous countries and cities and really a large portion of the globe. How do you think COVID has impacted cities and what trends have you observed?
Well, thank you, Bénédicte, first for this opportunity to discuss together and to share with the French and Australian and New Zealand Chamber of Commerce community. I have to say that I would have preferred to be down under with you, as I usually do every quarter. But clearly this time we all go digital, and that's probably the common thread that we have all been in the last 6 months. After my last trip to Australia in March, I went back to France to enjoy the lockdown as everyone. So that's the new trend we are in. And of course, the cities are going to have adapted themselves to that during the crisis time. And we are just at the beginning of the lessons learned, for sure. What I can share is that what I've seen across many geographies is pretty different, actually, in the way the COVID impacts cities, depending on the level of standard of living of each of the cities, depending on their structure, their number of inhabitants, level of infrastructures, and the lessons learned are just starting. Of course, we are seeing people wanting to get access to better living standard when they have to stay home for a very long time, which might lead to some pressure to go to suburbs. But we are seeing at the same time some consistent trends to keep cities equipped and centered with some community villages inside the cities. So these are elements that are just starting, and it will probably take years to get the full lessons on what COVID has changes in the cities. I think the very clear trend is that cities will continue to exist. Cities will continue to develop themselves because this is the place where people can gather, do economy, live together, and so on and so forth. But to be able to continue their development, they will have to be more reliable, they will have to be more safe, and they will have to provide an environment which enables people to enjoy their lives and provide security whenever human catastrophes like COVID is one may occur. And that's clearly a trend that we are seeing everywhere. Now, I'm also seeing cities that are just living as before, despite an outbreak of the virus in the city that is more than thousands a day. And that's clearly more the case of emerging markets. And for these cities, the lessons learned will be different, most likely. What will definitely most likely disappear is the unorganized development of cities with unhealthy housing in the centers. This will have a tremendous pressure everywhere, I think, in the future. So that's what I can say.
So some people have been talking about the death of CBDs and the rise of suburban. What you are saying, it's more like sometime a reset, and there is no generalization, but more it's a case by case depending on the countries.
And the structure of each city as well. And I start to know a little bit the cities of Down Under. Clearly, you have very large cities that are also pretty spread over large suburbs with very big suburbs with people that have single dwelling habitation. And that's kind of cities, of course, are quite sustainable in this environment. Because when you live in single dwelling, of course, your exposure to the virus is less important. So this kind of setup is probably more reliable from a health standpoint than many other places like Mumbai. I spent 1 month in Mumbai last month. In Mumbai, of course, everyone is completely packed into a very small, geographically spread city with 20 million plus inhabitants. And of course, you would imagine that controlling the virus in this environment is much more challenging.
So according to you, what is an attractive city of the future, and how is Schneider Electric best placed for fostering the development of attractive cities?
Well, I think to be attractive, the cities will need to build, as a company has to work on its value proposition, a city has to, and the cities will have to work on their value proposition to their inhabitants in the future and to the people who do business in the cities. And I believe that most of the cities are working on that, of course. If I had to think on what would define the attractiveness in the future, I think that sustainability of the city is clearly something that is going to define attractiveness in the future. It already starts to be the case in more and more cities, but this is going to be growing, and that's clearly something that I feel from the interactions we have with all cities in the world. The second element that is going to be driving attractiveness is the absence of disruption as well. But you may say that this is part of sustainability as well. But when you are a city citizen, you want to be part of a community that is sustainable overall. You want to be part of a story that is protecting the future of this environment, but you want also to live your life without disruption. And I think both ways are complementing themselves in building a sustainable and attractive value proposition to the community and to the individuals. So how can we as a company serve this purpose? We are basically working on the components of sustainability that are coming into the city, and we are also working a lot on preventing disruptions in the city. That's thanks to working a lot on the energy management side to provide to the cities the best possible mix of energy sources and users, which means working both on the sourcing of energy in a way that enables the renewable energy and storage to work together with the centralized generation capacities of the city. That's on the generation side, to enable the grid to distribute electricity in an efficient way in a world that is much more blurred between the center and the decentralized usage of electricity, and of course to work on the user side by providing as much as possible energy efficiency tools and methodologies, so that as a user we spend less energy as possible. So that's one way of working for us with all kinds of infrastructures in the cities. The other way is to work on preventing disruption, and that's mostly working on digital and automation, providing to any kind of infrastructure, be it the water companies, the infrastructure companies, transport companies, tunnels, and so on and so forth, all the elements of automation and supervision in digital that would enable to predict, maintain, and of course correct any risk of disruption that would then have immediate consequences on the rest of the city. So that's basically how we are working, and I have to say that we are pretty advanced in Australia and in New Zealand on the way these technologies are deployed. And I would really regard Australia and New Zealand as markets that are very advanced in the deployment of these technologies. Notably, for example, if I have just one example to give on the way the decentralized way of generating energy is deployed in Australia, where many single dwelling homes have rooftop solar, which is representing already today more than 20% of the homes in all Australia. In some of the states, this is much more than that, more than 50%. And of course, this represents a renewable energy sourcing, decentralized, with a full appropriation of the user that is much higher than in any country in the world. And that's showing a trend of sustainability that is very advanced and that we take at Schneider Electric as a great opportunity for the country, and that we are trying to help, of course, from a technology standpoint as much as we can.
You actually mentioned, thanks Luc for providing some examples and empowering the customer. You mentioned sustainability as the first criteria of an attractive city, and I mean, the company has really taken the lead on sustainability and climate change. I saw that you've developed what you call a Schneider Sustainability Impact Tool to measure progress around your own goals, which I'm assuming are quite high. How, as a member of the executive committee, how can you tell us how sustainability is really embedded and an anchor of Schneider Electric's vision and culture?
Well, it's been a long journey, quite frankly. We started in this journey decades ago, and this has become really one of the founding cornerstones of the company. Also because we develop technologies that are enabling sustainability, but beyond this, because as a company, we want to serve a purpose of sustainability. And this has become a cement of everyone in the company, not just something that the top of the company is talking about or fond of. This is really something that is really shared by everyone in the company as a common goal, and up to the point where it is a common definition of what we want to serve. The way it works is that, of course, we want to be concrete about it, and we take the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN, and out of this, we define very concrete achievements that the company wants to make in the next year. So we redefine our targets for each of the 21 goals that we translate into our own goals. We translate that in, if I remember well, 17 goals that are applicable to us specifically. And each year we would define a step up that we want to do to achieve more of these goals. And of course, we raise the bar every single year. So that's the way it works. So it affects very different domains, such as, of course, what we do on carbon emission reduction. So we have today the target of being carbon neutral on our value chain in 25, which is tomorrow. So that's a very big challenge. This is just one step in the journey. We have steps in the journey that are going even farther in the years coming after that. We are working on the, of course, human side. On human development, we have very precise targets on how we train, how we develop the people inside the company. We have also targets on the human development impact that we want to have in the communities that we serve in each of the 100 countries where we have presence, where we would develop an activity that has human impact in the market, in the country, which is a lot of training as well. Giving education is clearly one of the key aspects of human development that is most impactful over the long run. We are working, of course, on the sustainability of our manufacturing. We have 200 factories, roughly speaking, in the world. And of course, we want all these 200 factories to be leveled up at the highest sustainable level, which is, for example, to reach the fact that these 200 factories are at zero waste on the landfill. And that's typically the kind of targets that we would set, and we would lift up these targets year after year. So that's the way we proceed to try and be as fast as we can as a company both for ourselves and for our ecosystem and for our communities in the countries where we operate. This is part, of course, of the overall targets of the company that are yearly assessed by the board, and needless to say that this is, of course, part of the remuneration targets of everyone. So that's the way we try to lift up our level of ambition on sustainability at Schneider. And of course, we are going to continue this journey going forward.
Thank you. A very comprehensive system, and certainly one that fosters your social license to operate within the various countries and within your clients. The second criteria that you mentioned as an attractive CC is really the absence of disruption and the management of disruption. Schneider Electric systems are deployed in all critical infrastructures of cities, hospital, data centers, energy networks. How has COVID impacted your operation internationally and the operation of your client?
We have learned by doing, as everyone. I think the first element is that COVID has been a human experience for all of us as leaders, as individuals, and of course as a company. So the way COVID has impacted our operations is that in a matter of weeks, if not days, countries where we operate one by one went through lockdown. That was in March, basically. China was hit before, and China has managed that very well in a different way, with partial lockdown on some of the cities. But the first time that full countries went into lockdown was in March. So yes, at that time, the first challenge was to maintain operations, basically. So, and we have our 200 factories are in very, very different places. They are spread over the planet. And of course, we had to make sure that first we can operate safely ourselves for our people, that our customers can operate safely as well. So the first battle was to make sure that our safe operations were enabled. The second battle was to maintain operations everywhere, and we were fortunate to be able to convince authorities everywhere and to work with them so that we can maintain operations, and that's critical in many respects for the infrastructure we serve. So when you have no electrical equipment, you have no electricity. When you have no electricity, you have no hospitals, and you have no transportation, no basic services in any country. So that's clearly you have no data centers, for example. So these are the elements where the initial lessons and initial work at the outbreak of the virus, when the virus got global in March. Since that, of course, we have worked with all of our customers and all the governments of the countries where we operate, so that we can continue to serve as much as we can to enable continuity of operations of all of our customers. And in some times it has been quite challenging in some countries, but overall it led to a satisfactory level of operations everywhere. And we have seen now the trend of new asks that are coming, accelerated by COVID, linked to the disruption prevention concerns that I described before, which is leading essentially to more digital, to more remote sensing, remote action capabilities, to safe operations, which is, for example, allowing touchless control of any kind of device, infrastructure, equipment, automation devices. So all these kind of asks have accelerated since the outbreak of the crisis. And we see now a trend that is sustained of ask of changing the setup of a number of infrastructure so that it can be more reliable and relying more on digital, more on communication and connectivity, so that there are just not one way of controlling the assets or controlling an infrastructure, but several, to stay agile in case there is disruption somewhere. So that's clearly one of the key elements. The other one is that this generates a level of need in data infrastructure that is accelerated. And we see, of course, an acceleration of the data center needs closer to the usage of the data. So it's not just the need of big data centers in one place, but a balance between big data centers in one place and data infrastructure that are close to the data usage in order to ensure some reliability. So that's basically the key trends that we are seeing. Of course, on the power side, we are seeing also an acceleration of the needs of the grids to enable a more decentralized way of managing power, which is more reliable and more agile to adapt to needs that can be changing from one day to another. When you pronounce a lockdown of a city, before the lockdown, the CBD would be taking all the power during the day, and the suburbs will be taking all the power during the night or at the evening. If you pronounce a lockdown, it completely changes the profile of the grid from one day to the next, which means that the agility of the grid to take sources and users of power at any moment needs to be very significantly increased. And that's what we are working on to enable our grid clients to face these kind of challenges by more flexibility, more automation as well, and more data usage to predict what will be the needs and how to adapt itself to the needs. So that's, in a nutshell, what have been the key trends that we are seeing. The key lesson at this stage is that this is going to accelerate a lot the need for digital measurement and digital usage and digital automation to be able to prevent disruption, as the COVID has proven that there is clearly moments in a city life or in infrastructure life where you need to make quick decisions and you need to adapt yourself to a very big change.
So you mentioned, you're doing everything possible to ensure that life is on, and I can see the logo and mantra sitting behind you, which is a beautiful motto. You've mentioned a couple of times digitalization, disruption, automation. How does Schneider Electric ensure that it continuously attracts the talent and skills of tomorrow? And how actually do you promote internally a culture of innovation and collaboration and connectivity, actually?
That's a very good question. What I measure is that the purpose of the company has to be clear, and I believe it is clear. And what I measure is that the people joining us are joining us for the purpose of the company. Which means that they understand what we are trying to do for our community. They understand what we are trying to provide as a technology company. Of course, we attract engineers, but not only engineers. If I take the example of young engineers, if they join Schneider, the ones that I discuss with them, of course, very often, at least when I was able to travel, I was discussing with them in every geographies, and I could discuss with many of them in Australia and New Zealand. What I could measure is that they join us because they understand what we want to do and what is our purpose. Our sustainable goals, for example, sustainability in our purpose is something that is really clear for them, and they come to us with this motivation, and most of the time they stay with us because of this motivation as well. That's not enough, but that's important. The second element is that we need to provide to them an attractive environment to work and develop themselves, where there is, of course, an ecosystem that supports them, but there is enough space for entrepreneurship, and we are taking a lot of care for that to make sure that people development and entrepreneurship of individuals can be supported, fostered into the company, and enabled between ourselves and the ecosystem, with our partners, with our technology partners as well, people who are providing to us part of technologies that are not invented at Schneider, but essential to us as an ecosystem. So these are the elements that are, in my view, critical to continue to attract the best people. Of course, we need also to embrace new know-hows and cultivate difference, and to make sure that we attract the best people. We need to show to them that people that are different can happily join Schneider and stay in Schneider and have equivalent careers as others. So diversity is a critical element. And diversity means many things. It means gender diversity, means countries of origin diversity, means also business culture diversity, where we need people who are coming from a very different business culture on the data side, for example, from the ones that have developed their career in Schneider some time ago on electrical equipment, for example. And we need to mix these cultures inside the company in order to serve our customers. So we are trying to do things on these various fronts to keep ourselves as an attractive country and to keep people happy in the, not country, sorry, company, and to keep people happy in the company, which is the best way to be attractive.
Thanks very much. I was going to close the interview by asking you what's the latest initiative within the company that has made you really proud? I mean, I heard your chairman talk about the Tomorrow Rising Fund, for instance, but I'm sure you may have personally another example, or maybe this one.
Well, I'm not sure I can speak about an initiative, but I can tell you that what made me super proud, and every single day, is when I see the level of reactivity, innovation, engagement of every single one in our teams since the outbreak of this crisis. People serving our customers, working very hard from their homes sometimes, people taking physical challenge to go to our customers' premises at the heart of the crisis to maintain operations. You can only be super proud of being part of this team. And that's the main lesson for me.
Thank you very much, Luc, for being so generous with your time, and we really hope to see you soon. Good luck for the next few days, weeks, and of lockdown in France, and hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Benedict. It was my pleasure, and believe me, I am really missing Down Under, so as soon as I can, I'll get down.
Bonne journée, Luc. À très bientôt.
Merci, au revoir.